Fire on the Mountain, Part 12. August 16th, 1859. Miss Laura Sue Hunter, Miss Colby's School, Richmond. Dearest Laura Sue, I was sorry to say I was unable to attend our dear young cousin's funeral, which was held in Staunton, you know, not Baltimore. Our uncle saying that since John Bad died for Virginia, he must be buried there. I would rather say, since it was Virginia that threw his life away, since it is a prodigious misapprehension of the slave to think that he would submit to a boy, I managed to get to church on the night of the funeral, and my prayers were with you all. Your loving Thomas. Socialism was good for teeth, and Elvis Presley Cardwell had a new set. He was sitting on the trailer steps when the car rolled in, as silent as a hummer, under his sycamores, and stopped. It was the museum man with two colored women, one of them a child, but it was the car that interested Elvis. Haven't seen one of these in years, he said. I don't work on cars no more. I don't call them little Hummers cars. Sooner fool with the toaster, but this is different. He unpinned the engine cover, and Harriet and Grissom helped him lift it away. He was the skinniest man Harriet had ever seen. He looked like a piece of string standing up. He whistled approvingly between blinding white teeth. This is pottery, children. He shut off the hydrogen on the firewall, connected a nearby battery into the lube circuit with jumper cables, and heaved on the flywheel with the broomstick. When the crankshaft turned, it sounded like the lid on a pickle crock being slid over. He nodded. The problem was the oil field. The reason the old pottery engines never wore out, Elvis explained to Harriet, who was the only one listening, was because the moving parts were separated by a magnetic field that kept the porcelain cylinder walls and the contra porcelain pistons a fraction of a corn husk apart. The circuit board that kept the field awake had popped a coil, and that's why the engine had rattled like a basket of pots. It shouldn't have even turned over, Cardwell said, much less fired. If they'd run it, they'd have killed it in less than a minute. Shame, too, he said, to kill something that otherwise could live forever. Let's look under the injector board, right here, and see how old she is. She was twice Harriet's age, and less than half his own. I'd rather go to hell in a car than to heaven in a Hummer, Cardwell said. I don't care what I go in, said Yasmin. I just have to get to Staunton tomorrow, and I have to get that car back to Nova Africa in one piece. Cardwell said the co-op wouldn't have a board this old. It would have to come from New York, or maybe even Charleston. However, he just might find a board in a junked corn picker that just might work. There just might be one with a hydrogen pottery engine behind a dairy barn on the old Gentry place just this side of Winchester. Leave the car and call in the morning. It was getting dark by the time they got back to Shenandoah in a borrowed Hummer. Yasmin called Charleston to tell them about the car. Don't worry about it, the motor pool manager said. Come back on the airship. We'll make a board up, and somebody else can drive her down. No, I think it'll be fixed tomorrow, Yasmin said. Besides, I have to stop back at my mother-in-law's. I don't want her to have to watch the Mars landing alone. Then Yasmin called Pearl to tell her they would be late. They're late too, honey, Pearl said. Turn on your vid. There's a big storm on Mars, and they can't go down. They're liable to be parked all of a week in orbit. Oh no, Yasmin thought, as she logged off and punched on the vid. She felt as if she was circling the planet with them. She wished they would go ahead and land so she could get on with her life. Planet-wide dust storm, the woman on the vid was saying. That settles it, Yasmin thought, scanning past. She decided to go on and tell Harriet she was pregnant tonight. While her mother was on the wire with Charleston, Harriet stood on the terrace outside the hotel room and scanned the mountainside with her eyes narrowed, trying to make out the trail Grissom had shown her on the map. the trail Tubman and Brown and their men had followed up on the mountain on the 4th, 100 years ago, loaded down with weapons and cornmeal, shot and powder and dry beans, pursued by a lynch mob the size of a nation. All she could see were scarlet trees and dark green laurel, waving like pond weeds. There was a storm coming up, and the air was filled with leaves. Then suddenly there it was, the trail revealed by 3 figures hurrying down the mountain on a long diagonal, day hikers, not carrying packs, trying to beat the darkness home. Just like in dialectics class, the trail discovered itself when somebody walked on it. Behind her, she could hear her mother scanning through the vid. There was a story on about the Mars landing only hours away, but Harriet heard the finder scan past it, then double-click on eastern Kentucky quilts. Patterns as unchanging as the hills, as if anybody cared. Harriet wondered if they wrapped the dead in them, as the old-fashioned gulas on the Congaree River in Nova Africa still did. She bet they used pretty worn-out quilts. She wished her mother would just let her father be gone, be dead, sail on, and quit worrying about him never coming home. Her grandmother said it was because Leon had never been buried. People were old-fashioned that way, she explained. They wanted to cover you up. But for Harriet, there was nothing strange about her father sailing through space and never touching ground. She didn't want him covered up. It was time to get home. Harriet had wanted to have her mother to herself for just a few days. It was time to get home. Harriet had wanted to have her mother to herself for just a few days before getting back to Charleston, schools, friends, family, collective. But it hadn't been much fun. Her mother was distracted, vague, as far away as she'd been halfway around the world, in Africa. Maybe something had happened there. Maybe she had met a man and she was going to get married. Harriet didn't even like to think about that. She put one foot up on the railing and looked at her new shoes. It was neat that they were from space. She bet her mother wouldn't have gotten them if she had known. They had grown up her ankles, and when she stroked the high tops, they loosened slightly. They felt nice. The problem was, she had slept in them 2 nights, and they still looked stupid, like gray house slippers with thick yellow soles. She heard the finder scan back to the Mars story, double-clicking on it this time. The whole world was poised in orbit with the lion, waiting on the storm that was scouring the canyon lands 1,200 clicks below. When Harriet was at Vesey Youth Camp on Wad Mala Island, the summer before last, a woman from the Pan-African Space Administration had made a special visit to show her the memorial plaque that the second expedition was going to put on Mars for her father. Harriet held it for a school picture. It was as light as a palm leaf, but it would last, the woman said, 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years. It was embarrassing because she had cried when they asked her to read it out loud. Harriet, she heard her mother's voice from right behind her, startling her. Then she felt her arms around her, as surprising and warm as sunlight from between clouds. I have something to tell you. Don't look at me so worried like that, honey. Some good news. If Brown and Tubman are going to free the slaves, when are they going to do it? What was the question on most folks' minds as summer turned into the fall of '59? Of course, black folks and white were worrying about it from somewhat different perspectives. By September, they had been on the mountain 2 months, and nothing had happened except for the disaster when the militia and then the cadets went after them. No slaves had been freed that anybody knew about. Meanwhile, federal troops, real troops, and not just whiskey tossers and hog collars, were gathering in the Loudoun Valley east of the mountain. And the slaves were waiting, watching, wondering, pondering. Freedom. What did it mean? Did it mean I had to live like the white folks? In spite of their nicer houses, I didn't envy their mean, pinched lives. I envied the free black folks, some but not much. I even figured to be free myself someday, since Deal had promised Mama and me our papers when we moved north. But it didn't mean much to me. There were plenty of free-colored around Charlestown, and from what I had seen, a black man's freedom in a white man's world didn't amount to much. My real dream, which not even Cricket knew, was to go far away, beyond the mountains, away from the black folks as well as the white, away from Virginia, from America. And I imagined that somewhere over the rainbow, which I had since seen once straddling the mountain like a bridge, there was a land where people lived in peace and harmony, didn't spit in the corners for boys to mop up, talk sweet to children, read books, didn't fight, didn't smell like wood smoke and horse shit. I know now it was Lebanon, a dream imparted to me along with reading by my homesick friend, the Arab. His idealized childhood Lebanon, mixed with every child's original dream of socialism, that genetic, I insist, utopia, without which there would be no actual socialism, with all its warts for soul-hungering man. Some but not all of this sweetness I was to find in Nova Africa, some in Cuba, some in Ireland, but all that was still a lifetime away. Meanwhile, every night the fire on the mountain burned, and the question burned in folks' heads. If they're going to free the slaves, when are they going to do it? Then, one night something happened that struck fire to my soul and settled forever all my questions about freedom. End of part 12.